Hello and welcome to another edition of Two Guys Discussing Software. My name is Tomás O'Leary, I'm CEO and founder of Origina, and I'm very happy to be talking to you all today. It's a tricky time to be talking to people. There's a lot going on out there. A lot of people very worried about what's happening in the world today. The last time we spoke, we had touched on the coronavirus COVID-19 issue, but we're here today, myself and my very good friend, Brendan Walsh. Brendan, hello, how are you?
Hey, good morning. Good morning, Tomas. We're still two Irish guys, albeit we're remote from each other discussing software. But yeah, it's good to be on the podcast again. Very interesting times. We're all working remote. I think this is only the second podcast done where we've been remote from each other and we couldn't see each other. So might be that way for the next couple of podcasts, perhaps.
Yeah. And today, Brendan, we when we prepared this, we have a very interesting guest later on. The topic today is how should organizations and how society is dealing with and should be dealing with aging technology, particularly in business and society today. And we have a very good guest joining us shortly, Dr Umaima Haider, who is a research fellow at the University of East London. She'll be joining us in a few minutes as we do once we've finished our usual chat. But I think it's kind of interesting, the context today between, hardware obsolescence, which is obviously Umaima's particular area, and our conversation traditionally around the whole area of software legacy. I think they're connected in many ways, but also not. There's also times when they're not connected, and I think we might have a good conversation with her about her research in that area, about sustainable ICT infrastructure. So I'm looking forward to that chat later on. I wanted to just start though. It's a tricky environment out there. And Brendan, we're looking at all of the industries that are being impacted. We've got, travel, tourism, hospitality, sports, conferences that we do, non-grocery retail, you name it, an industry has been impacted severely. Some very few, but some have been impacted positively. But there's so many industries, transportation, that have just been decimated, absolutely decimated overnight. What's it going to mean to the software industry? Are there winners out there? Are there losers? What's your take on this?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it's a tough question, right? Because this is something very new. It's really unprecedented. We've seen nothing like this, in our time. I mean, you can go back to the last kind of recession, 2008, impacted the global economy, but it was very different to this in that, it didn't specifically impact how people work, how they travel to work, how they connect. This is a very, very different kind of set of circumstances. I think the one thing that in reading some of the literature is that, the economy, the world economy is essentially on pause, right? I mean, it's nearly impossible in certain sectors to do business right now. But that pause we should be able to hit the play button again. We just don't know when that is. And so we therefore need to start preparing for it. In terms of the impact on the software industry, I've been in the software industry, all my life. And, one of the things that, I do as a software sales guy is I travel and I go and meet people. I meet people at conferences. I meet clients face to face to discuss their problems, how we can solve them, how we can deliver our services better. So, we're a very, we sociable bunch of software guys. So that's going to be extremely impacted, certainly in the coming months. That impacts how we do business. There's going to be an impact on software sales targets, because we can't go to the conferences to meet clients. It will slow down lead generation. It'll impact deal closure. I think right now, where deals might have otherwise been closed, but they needed people to get into a final boardroom presentation. So I think the software world it's going to be challenging. I mean, there's other challenges in the production industry. The likes of, let's say, if you're producing technology like iPhones or desktops or whatever, that requires production facilities and requires people to be in close proximity. So there's going to be a slowdown in production. There's going to be a slowdown in sales because people will be risk averse to spend money. So look, I think the world economy for a time is going to be on pause, and that's going to affect the software industry, the technology industry, and there will be winners and losers. I mean, if you look at the Irish economy, well, let's say 15% of our economy is public sector. The other 15% is kind of international businesses that operate here, big tech giants. And then 70% of the economy, like a lot of countries, but more particular to Ireland, is small emerging companies, and there will be winners and losers in those. Certainly, almost immediately, we're seeing the likes of Zoom, Slack, the remote team workings, connectivity providers probably going to thrive and boom on the back of the particular predicament that we're in. But I'm hopeful, I think, as are many global software leaders, that this is a pause. Life will get back to normal. But I think we're all going to start having to think about how we might have to operate in really what will be in a different world. And so that whole digital transformation, which is the theme of today, comes to the forefront. Companies are going to have to adapt. They're going to have to move much more quickly to digitally transform their businesses.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And one of the things that springs to my mind is you look at, okay, the stock markets have fallen through the floor. I mean, I think at one stage the Dow Jones was down over 30%. FTSE was nearly 35% down. The Nikkei was over 30%. They're all dropping. I mean, these are drops of I think the world has ever seen drops of these kind. But if you just leave that to one side, bring it back to what's happening from the tech perspective, and this is something maybe we might talk about with Umaima later when we're on the podcast. The importance of the technology sector now. You mentioned a couple of them there. Obviously, Microsoft with Teams and Zoom and Slack and all these kind of providers. But the importance of technology. All these people working from home. There's no way they'd be able to work from home without broadband, without applications, without data centers that serve out the technology. I mean, the demand must be remote working. I'm not sure what the impact is ultimately on because ultimately these people will either be working in their offices or working remote. I'd say the demand on bandwidth must be enormous because it wasn't envisaged that everybody would be so distributed at the same time. I think there was reports that Netflix were turning down the quality of their feed to free up bandwidth. I mean, it's amazing that that these are the sort of things that people have to do because broadband is everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. But if you go into an individual's home any time of the day, I'm sure you'll have people complaining about connectivity and network issues. And I mean, I don't know how many conference calls we've all done where somebody's line wasn't working exactly as expected. Leaving aside any background noise that might be from the children running into the room and they're not supposed to.
Yeah. It won't be just the kids screaming about the Wi-Fi anymore. I mean, I've got kids and all they complain about is the Wi-Fi is terrible or whatever. But actually now it's going to be corporate executives saying, the Wi-Fi isn't working. I mean, we saw, last week that I think, the first days of when people were put into lockdown in various countries, Teams actually itself was suffering. It wasn't functioning. Not for very long. I think obviously it was addressed in terms of the capacity needed, but it was initially was creaking a little bit because everybody was jumping on. I mean, I know some local stories of people I know working in various businesses, and actually they're just simply not equipped to work from home. You'd be surprised, but I know people in the healthcare industry, and they don't all have laptops. And there's a rush on even running out to buy webcams. You can't try and go down to your local technology store today and see if you can buy a webcam. Forget about it. They're just not available.
They're not available.
Simple little things like that you have to think about. Fortunately, we're not affected here in our business because we have the technology, but there's many industries that don't. So small little things to the very large will all be very different.
So despite the 400 billion value that fell off the top 5 tech companies last week, we should probably count ourselves lucky that we're in an industry that we can really work remotely. So that's for sure. I remember Bill Gates a couple of years ago had a famous quote. If your business is not on the internet, then your business will go out of business. I think that's so true. But it's not possible for any companies to, how does the clothing retailer? Yes, it can distribute its clothes remotely, but there's certain things you still need human interaction for. So yeah, I think if the observation in my head is that one, the tech industry and the software industry in particular is increasingly becoming much more like a utility, and we should count ourselves lucky despite all of the challenges, those of us who work in the tech, because at the end of the day, it's going to become more and more important. And we will talk about later some of the rules and regulations on that are coming downstream, and I'd be interested to chat to Umaima as well when we get to talk to her. There's been a few things happening still that are worth maybe having a chat about, Brendan.
There have, yeah. There's still the good stories out there. I know we always like to talk about our favorite company, IBM, and we like to talk about Ginny Rometty. And I think we're going to wrap up the discussion on Ginny Rometty once and for all on this podcast. But I did hear some.
Is that it? We're not going to talk about her ever again.
Well, I don't know if we'll talk about her necessarily, but she is the CEO or former CEO that keeps on giving, because in 2019, the results were out recently, but some of the the salaries and payments have been released. So Ginny in 2019 earned over about $20 million, just over $20 million in remuneration from IBM, and that was on a IBM business that increased its revenue by 0.1% over the year on year. They actually missed their own targets. They did have a revenue of 77 billion, but they missed their targets that they had set internally of 79.4 billion. So they missed their targets, but she still received a bonus of 11.6 million, which was up from 2018. So she can do no wrong, obviously, in IBM, or just have interesting remuneration programs. But I did read that she did lead a socially responsible approach to AI, and that was one of her KPIs, obviously, for the year, and that resulted in her getting a larger base salary and bonus than she did in 2018. So yeah, she's superwoman.
Hopefully we won't have to lock ourselves up in the future because of some crazy developers who might create some AI that causes as much damage as a virus. But that's probably for another podcast. And you were telling me earlier you had some news on their ongoing row with the co-op. Is that correct?
Oh, the ongoing saga, yeah. So it seems to be done now. They're finished. Both sides have finished having their say in the courts. But this is the Project Cobalt saga, which started in 2014, where the co-op contracted with IBM. They won the bid ahead of Wipro, who were the second bidder. They won the bid to deliver them their IT transformation project, which was going to be super duper solution for the insurance group. It was a £175 million project. Interestingly, 50 million of that was for the initial license, and 125 million over 10 years for support. So just 12.5 million a year for support. But anyway, IBM were working with the innovation group, now known as One Insurer, to deliver a solution, which according to IBM, when they were doing their pitch, it was an out-of-the-box white label solution that could easily be customized for the co-op group within 9 months, and that data migration was going to take about 24 months before the co-op were live. But anyway, in about 2015, the project fell off the tracks, and they've been in the courts for a while over this, and it's kind of just wrapping up now. So they're having to take some judgments as to who was right and who was wrong. But obviously, co-op were saying that IBM failed to deliver. They promised them something that didn't exist, which was this out-of-the-box solution that could easily be configured. IBM are blaming co-op and some of their consultants. So it's a bit of it's trouble, but it's 175 million of a failed project, and it'll be interesting to see where the dice fall on that one. But but it's a classic tale of software, big complex software project going wrong, a bit of scope creep, I'd imagine. But ultimately, I think it sounds like IBM overpromised and underdelivered.
Well, we see it all the time. I mean, out of the box. I mean, to a layman, out of the box is you open the box, you take something out, and you use it. I think in the out of the box way, in the software industry, this is a big issue with the software industry for many, many years, not just with IBM, is that their out of the box solutions are so far away from even the most complicated flat pack out of the box you might come across it as a consumer. It's just outrageous.
Forget about it. You can't use that expression anymore. I mean, it's not a desktop, piece of software. It was a crazy notion that you could customize something that was built in the US in 9 months and then hope that it would be delivered. There were just too many challenges. So the CEO of the co-op was pretty scathing in his comments, calling the project a disaster, and the agile approach that IBM and Innovation Group took to the project as being just fraught with problems, So yeah, it'll be interesting to see where the judgment falls. 175 million is at stake. Yeah, hopefully we'll have some update on that in the next podcast. But
And you see Oracle let go over 1,000 people here in Europe?
Yeah, I saw that.
I mean, 1,300 positions apparently being let go. They had recorded a loss of over 500 million in 2018, apparently, after taking an impairment charge, according to some of the reports. So, yes, you can see these mega vendors are obviously under a lot of pressure. I mean, IBM changing their CEO, Oracle increasingly under pressure. I mean, their stock has been under pressure anyway. I think they're, even before all of the challenges that are there now. I mean, I think at one stage IBM was a valuation of less than 80 billion. The first time it's been below that, even 100 billion as a valuation of a company for decades. And Oracle was not too far ahead of it. So yeah, I think they're all having challenges. Are there were one or two other items you were looking at as well, Bren?
Yeah, well, I just think, on the topic of today, digital transformation, I was just looking at that a little bit. And so I think it's highly topical, in terms of our guest speaker. But yeah, I was just looking at the world and looking at the Fortune 500 companies. And it's something that we've, referred to before. But it reminded me of the economist Joseph Schumpeter. I think you know about Joseph Schumpeter. You read some of the economists that I read, and he talks about creative destruction. So I was trying to investigate what's going on and why is there so much churn and why are companies failing to survive, and why only 1 out of 10 of the original Fortune 500 companies remain on the list today, and the fact that half of today's companies that are in the Fortune 500 will not be there in about 10 years' time. And it's because of, they won't survive because they fail to adapt and change. And they're overcome by what's known as this, what Schumpeter termed creative destruction. And really, creative destruction is about the fact that, other companies see an opportunity to be better, faster, cheaper, able to serve customers better, deliver goods at lower prices, deliver a quality product, deliver a great customer experience. And that, we see that that churn, that instability of capitalism taking hold, which in Schumpeter's opinion was, it was a positive force of capitalism, that the destruction of the old brings in the new. And so the old jobs are replaced with the new jobs, and old companies are replaced with new companies. And the new companies are just more agile, bring in more efficient processes, and adapt to change. And that's what we're seeing with digital transformation. Those companies that will transform faster will survive. So yeah, it's an interesting space, and we've got a very interesting speaker that I think can talk to us a little bit more about it. But tying back, what's happening in the world of tech with the world of economics. So I would find that quite fascinating that somebody in the 1940s and 50s, that his economic theorems are still alive and well today.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And look, talk about an industry that's been decimated, the conference industry. I mean, yourselves been impacted by this, but there's been literally hundreds, if not thousands, of conferences that have just been postponed. Some of them, and many of them, have gone to online versions. But you got Apple, you got Microsoft, you've got Gartner, Dell, Facebook. I mean, you name it. These organizations, the transformation is going to be just so incredible. I just don't know where we're going to start. I think we're going to see some real change there. And hopefully it'll be change for the good once we get through this pain, because I think there's going to be some massive change. There was some other interesting story. I don't know if you saw the story about IBM's row with Airbnb. I mean, I'm always kind of fascinated with the laws around technology, intellectual property, patents, etc. And I have a kind of a view there, as you probably know. I mean, I was looking at this again. This has happened so many times. I mean, IBM have done this before. They took on Groupon a while back. They took it on Twitter. They took on Twitter. I don't know if you remember that when Twitter was going for its IPO. That's a real kind of classic. Kind of hit them when they're just about to go public, and so it just it's like a really sly dig, and they've been pushing back naturally, saying that they're not a patent troll. Of course, they're going to say that, and because a patent troll technically is somebody who buys patents up and then goes after people for infringement. IBM doesn't really need to do that. It's got 7 million patents in its own name already. It's got the most patents of any organization. I just think it's really interesting to see that they're allowed to do this. I mean, it doesn't make any difference whether you buy the patents or you make the patents. Of course, there needs to be protection. And my argument for years was that I actually really think that the laws and the rules have been far too heavy towards the creator. And the person who's spending the money on the products, the businesses and society, are really on the back foot. It's why you see in technology space, you've got increasingly things like, obviously open source software. Now we've got open source hardware as well, clearly. But what was really interesting, what came out about 2 weeks ago, was the European Commission obviously have this whole plan. It's called a European Green Deal, but they came out with a Circular Economy Action Plan. Might have been seen. These sort of things are going to get missed now because of the only news really we're all watching is coronavirus. But what's really interesting about this is that it's going to start looking at how we're going to extend the life cycle of products. How do we allow the right to repair as a priority, including software? Okay, and they've already said this, that they're prepared to review the laws around that. Well, that includes intellectual property laws, IP exhaustion laws, patent exhaustion laws, whatever the laws may be. They're prepared to look at these things. This is the first time this has ever happened. And you're also going to start seeing, my prediction is you'll see the exact same thing happening in the US. Because ultimately what's happening here is that I believe these organizations, the mega vendors included, have been holding people to hostage. And it might be a good time to bring Umaima back into the conversation. I think Umaima, you've joined us. Umaima Haider, how are you? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. How are you?
I'm very good. I hope you're well. And you're in London today, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Well, I hope you're being safe. I suspect, like us all, you're locked in and keeping safe. Before we went on air, we heard news there that your Prime Minister contracted the coronavirus. I'm not sure whether that was fake or real news, but it just shows that nobody is free from it. And no matter what you might think of him, I think we wish him all the best in getting better. I think it's been an interesting conversation. I think you were listening to the conversation we've been having, Umaima. I don't know whether you have a view on some of the things we're talking about that you would like to share with us. Have any thoughts on some of the things we're talking about?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the big question is that how could we keep the pace with the digital transformation? I mean, that's the main thing. As Brandon mentioned, that there are certain companies in Fortune 500 list that have become obsolete. I mean, this is the reason that they couldn't cope up with the digital transformation things. I mean, I just take that how we could keep the pace with digital transformation. I mean, from my perspective, if I try to explain in the layman terms, is that we have to catch the train from the station. Individuals and organizations need to get on board quickly in order to achieve this business goal. If we couldn't able to cope up, we couldn't able to maintain the currency with rapidly changing digital technologies. I mean, in terms of software, hardware, I mean, maybe I'll discuss some of the case studies related to hardware as well. So, I mean, this is some of the importance that we need to touch upon. Like, for example, these days, everybody working remotely. If I give the example of Adobe, who moved to digital transformations. I mean, it was founded in 1982 and they offer software for desktop PCs. And now it has become a massive cloud services company that surpassed $11 billion revenue in 2019. The other examples that we all talk about, the Microsoft, it's like recently the Microsoft received released a report which says that $33.7 billion revenue they have in their quarter four 2019. And the main chunk is come up with Azure, that is 64% of their revenue, and the other is Surface 14%, and LinkedIn up to 25%. Just imagine, I mean, due to this pandemic situation, Microsoft haven't introduced Azure in 2010, and which how could people able to use the cloud services? And the other example is, like you also touched upon, this MS Teams. The people are using the Teams, and if we have seen last week that active users from 32 million to 44 million. And if you look, their last year report is that in July, they have only 13 million users. Now you can see that how the people are using and moving towards the digital technology. The company need to be focused. I mean, the thing is that in various ways they need to follow the policies, best practices and standards, and not only to educate their employee to and benefits their employee, that they should provide latest skills need to work in this emerging economy. And obviously they have to focus on the new metrics and the KPIs that relate to this. So I mean, I'd say it is important. In this case too, we should move on towards the digital transformation strategy.
What happens if you don't? Okay, I get you, and I agree with you. There's many trains that we need to be on, and you mentioned Adobe and you mentioned Microsoft there. I think you're right that some of the things that they've done have been fantastic. But what happens if you don't want, and it's not appropriate to catch some of the trains that are turning up at the station? Going back to your analogy, because it's not always about catching every. There are trends, there are things that isn't it about maybe analyzing what is the right thing to do? Because often we see this in our industry, this obsession with the latest, and it's the same with consumers, the latest trend, the latest thing. And often organizations and human beings, we don't stop to think and look at necessarily the impact of that. There may well be certain times where the older technology is fine. There may be times where, and even from a data center perspective, while you might find that the technology stacks that you have deployed in your data center are maybe not massively efficient when you actually look at each one on its own, and then they may consume more energy than, let's say, a newer footprint. But obviously, with the likes of Moore's law now, obviously almost becoming redundant, or so that's the argument. Perhaps it makes sense to elongate the life cycles. That's what, in terms of the European Economic Action Plan and some of the recent laws that have come out around the Eco Design Directive, some of that is about saying, listen, guys, we need to have certain rules around it. What's your view on some of that? Not necessarily taking some of those trains.
First I would like to touch upon the thing that you said, that it is not necessary to do the refresh or something. I do agree with this. I mean, there is pros and cons in both things. I was reading a news and it is from the US, and it says that, the title of the news is Aging Tech Means Raises for Some Americans Who Lose Jobs in Coronavirus. They released some news or something like that their lower paid US workers could effectively get a short-term raise if they lose their jobs during the coronavirus. The aging state means mainframes do not have the ability to calculate different payments per worker. They released something $2.2 trillion package last week or something, and now they are giving across the board increase of $600 for each worker. And their system couldn't able to classify that what workers achieve what wages. Basically, the reason was that the states will have to reprogram their computer system to provide the new benefit to move accordingly to the per persons. And this is that more than half, including California, New York, and Pennsylvania, still rely on decades-old mainframe systems based on COBOL language that was first introduced in 1959. And the consequence is that the increase could pay some low-wage workers more than they earned on the job, which the content carries the risk of inadvertently driving up employment. Obviously, if you get more money than you earn and while sitting at home, who is going to go and work out? This is one of the consequences I just came across about the aging technology. So, I just want to give you one from hardware perspective, just one example that our group have carried out a small piece of research we conducted during the Eureka project. And that was a EU-funded project by European Commission's Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Programs, in which we have partners from UK, Ireland, Netherlands, and Germany. The basic aim of the project is how we can make our data centers, that is our ICT infrastructure, energy efficient. And our target was to consider the public sector data centers. And we analyzed over 300 public sector data centers, that is from the Irish government, UK government, and the Netherlands government. And once we analyzed their data centers, we have given the list of the servers and all the IT equipments, what they have. Once we analyzed their data centers hardware equipment, the interesting thing that we came across is that 40% of their servers were more than 5 years old. That make them account for 66% of energy consumption. And if you talk in terms of the performance, they are only performing 70% of compute capacity. Just imagine, I mean, they are only giving you the useful work of 7%. And
7%.
they are,
You say 7, did you? 7%.
yeah, 7%. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, I mean, the list of the servers is long. We have analyzed over thousands of servers from across the over 300 public sector data centers. They consume 60%, 66% of energy consumption. Now, I mean, that is what the revealing figure in terms of the scale of wastage energy become. The main idea to share this with you is to demonstrate that aging technology not only reduces your performance, it also has a negative environmental impact and economic impact as well. Like when we gave them, like if you just simply shut down these 40% of their servers, they could achieve the savings of 66% of energy consumptions. Overall, when we analyze and based on our mathematical model, we have achieved a savings of over 131 gigawatt hour per year of primary energy. And if you convert that into grid efficiency factor, it is 52 gigawatt of hour per energy. We were able to save around 27,000 tons of carbon emissions per year during the project when we analyzed these over 300 public sector data centers. We came across a couple of saving opportunities. I mean, in terms of this, like old hardware, if you refresh your hardware, then you can save lots amount of energy. The other thing is about the utilization of the servers. We have seen that most of their servers are utilized on an average of 20% utilization. So if they increase the utilization of their servers, there should be a chances of increase, I mean, in the capacity as well. I mean, as you touched about the eco design legislation, that is what the legislation came across, I mean, based on the utilization and things. And what the regulation says that we have to cap some idle power, reduction of the idle power at least to the 10%, and the something like about the material efficiency thing as well, that how you can easily disassemble your equipment as well, I mean, to make it properly in terms of the refurbishment aspect as well.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and I think you make some valid points there. I guess the only thing that the skeptic in me looks at that and goes, yes, you can make the savings in energy, and I guess it's about what trains do we need to catch. I think you're right. There are times when I think you do need to make these changes, but even with that, what you're saying, I'm always a little skeptical about the just focusing on one specific area, like a data center and its energy consumption and utilization, like the replacement cost, the cost of actually manufacturing, of shipping, of the actual risk. And I mean, we work in the software world where the biggest risk, so let's say we have lots of clients who run software applications on very old technology, okay? And they actually do it for good reason. You mentioned the one in the United States running COBOL. One of the challenges they have is that I think your particular case, probably a change is good. But for many companies, actually, the job that the software does is absolutely adequate, okay? They don't want to make a change, okay? And it's not a case in all cases, but they don't want to make a change. Let's say a very simple process, a billing system for a utility company where the number of users is not changing, and there's no need to make any changes to what's on the bills. So there's no growth in population and there's no growth in users. So they don't need to do anything different other than maybe just print the bills or calculate the bills. That's it. That's all it does. Nothing sexy about it. They don't need to make any changes. The risk of them changing it is actually like replacing that hardware when it's actually perfectly fit for purpose is actually downtime, that people don't receive the bills. Therefore, the company doesn't get paid. They're ultimately then actually have to charge higher potential prices down the line to their customers, which has an economic cost, plus also the manufacturer of all of the equipment that actually has to come in to replace it. So there's I just think the story is always wider. I accept what you say, and in terms of the research that you've done, I think it's an important part of the story. And I think there's always, for me, it's always about, before I catch a train, I want to make sure I know where I'm going and exactly what's going on, which direction the train is going. Is it the right train to be on? I think you've seen, and as more and more of the software and hardware becomes obsolete, what about the vendors themselves, the manufacturers, the big companies who make the technology? I mean, obviously you're familiar with the ones that make the data center technology. We're familiar with the ones that make the software. What do you think their role is in tackling some of this kind of sustainability challenges?
Follow the policy standards and the best practices, I would say. That is the thing. I mean, to make it done sustainably, to cope up what the society needs. I mean, it's the main thing as a research that it must be widely adopted by companies before society adapts it. So I think so that is the main point to make it sustainable. And obviously, the second thing is that, as you said, that people don't want to go for the replacement or downtime, or then they need to think about the circular economy approach as well. I mean, refurbishment. As I'm aware of that, in north of UK in Scotland, that HP has some recycling unit, and last year they released some figures that they received 4 million units to for as a recycle purpose, and in that 80% of them they have recycled, repaired, and they are used. It's not only the HP equipments, other vendors were involved in that as well. So, and 20% was safely removed. So they need to consider about the environmental impact. Well, as you know, in December, the European Commission President, she said that by 2050, the EU should be net zero. And in terms of the EU in data centers, this is by 2030, that should be net zero carbon emission. If we are still using the old hardware, I mean, back more than 3 or 5 years, that is not giving you more useful work rather than sitting and consuming energy. We need to consider about the hardware refresh. I think that is the thing that we need to consider, that either we go for the refurbishment or refresh of the hardware. It depends how old is your service. Either it is before 2015, that I would say that you should refresh. If it is after 2015 model or manufacturers, I would say that it won't keep in harm. I mean, it just increase your utilization as well. Like last week, Vodafone in UK says that they have a 50% capacity in their utilization. So they are not worried, like these days the people are using more the network. So they are able to manage this thing out. I would say from what I'm seeing the news in terms of the cloud services, that is the only market due to this COVID-19 is not getting any negative impact in terms of the economy.
And Umaima, Brendan here. So we've been talking about the reuse, recycling, sustainability of the older tech. What about the future technologies? How do you see future technologies becoming, more sustainable, maybe more durable, if that's the right term? Is there anything you could comment on that, do you think?
I would say, it is. We need a future technology. Like, for example, like 5G is coming up. So we need to cope up some hardware equipments according to their requirements, as well as Hawaii says that 5G networks will support thousand-fold gains in capacity connections for at least 100 billion devices, and a 10 gigabit per second individual user experience of extremely low latency and response times. So we need make, like, for example, the routers and the switches up to that standard, to that configuration, that we could able to meet the 5G. And obviously there are more services coming in the cloud computing. The best example is the distributed ledger technology. You can hold multiple records in different systems. And the best example of digital ledger technology is that most people come across is blockchain. And blockchain is one type of a digital distributed ledger. In other words, it comes under the umbrella of distributed ledger technology. The most common example, if I say a blockchain application, is cryptocurrency. And among those, if you see, I was just saying last night only, we have over 2,000 cryptocurrency, and one of the most common is Bitcoin. What used to be in last few years, people used to begin doing the mining at home. Now it has been scaled up to we have dedicated data centers that do the Bitcoining mining. So we have introduction of the new equipment like the anti-miners from the Bitmans, who released last October in Frankfurt as well.
Oh no, I was more thinking, Mime, about the use of open source software, open source hardware. If you had something brief you could kind of mention on that, what do you think about the use of that, like the Open Compute project or Open 19? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if somebody gave me the option, that I will say that everything should be open source, because it would be much easier. Like last week only, there was a debate on that that Amazon released some healthcare or services on their cloud services as well. So, and they are trying to make it open so that the more people, more scientists across the world will come and contribute. And that was the one example that in that way we could expedite the things and made the coronavirus vaccine much quicker rather than restricting it to one country and not people allowing them to contribute in this thing. And the best example in terms of the hardware is that open source hardware, which has been, came across in around 2011 from Facebook and Microsoft, Google, Goldman Sachs, and other companies has contributed to this. And the main idea with them is to provide super efficient designs that any company can use to build their own hardware. So this is one example. And in 2017, LinkedIn initiated Open19 as well. Open source software, we have seen it from the last 2 decades. They are in place, like, for example, Mozilla Firefox web browser, PHP scripting language, and Apache HTTP web servers. My concern is that we need to raise the awareness in terms of the open source hardware to make it more efficiently to grow, and even we could work together and make these things expedite.
Yeah, definitely sounds like awareness is a problem.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, you make a good point there about open source, and you mentioned some of the vendors earlier. We've talked about IBM, you mentioned HP. Umaima, I think to wrap this up, I would have a view on that as well, like yourself. Open source, whether it be open source hardware, open source software, is the way to go ultimately. And the tech industry in general has been resistant of that because it feels that it can't control its revenue stream if it's gone open source. And I think that there's a mindset change needed. And I think it's not going to come from the vendors. It's got to come from policymakers. They've got to make certain changes to the rules. And that's why I go back to what I said earlier about the European Commission the Circular Economic Action Plan. This is really good stuff that's coming out of Europe. I think you're going to see the same things coming out of the States when all this issue around coronavirus settles down, and hopefully we end up in a better place by the time we do our next podcast. But thank you, Umaima. I really appreciate your input. We've got to wrap this up for this month. We've had a fantastic interaction there. Brendan, I'm sorry we're not together. We're going to be together hopefully next time, but maybe not, depending in 3 or 4 weeks' time.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it the next time, but hopefully that'll come to pass. But it's been very enjoyable nonetheless with yourself and Umaima today.
Great. And we'll back in the 21st of April. We'll have Martin Thompson, who is the founder of ITAM Review and the author of the Practical ITAM, chair of the ITAM Forum, doing a lot of work around the ISO standards for the ITAM and community and industry. So it's the changing role of the software asset manager, changing role of SAM. So hopefully we get a few of our software asset managers and those who are not in the software asset management role. They might be interested to understand what it is those of the software asset management community do. That's on the 21st of April.
Very good.
We have also got, next week we have Guy Tritton. We're back on US time zone, 2 p.m. Eastern time, to run another webinar on those of you who have IBM, who may well be listening, hopefully. Know your IBM rights from one of the foremost legal experts on this side of the pond, on the European side. So, without further ado, thank you, Umaima. Thank you, Brendan.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yes, thanks indeed, Umaima. Thank you, Tomas, and talk to you soon, and hopefully see you soon.
We'll all see you next time. Keep safe and stay indoors. Do as we're all told, and we'll get through this no problem. Thank you. Bye-bye.